An 8-year-old orphan girl wakes up to desperate screams coming from the river near her precarious shack. She peers through the window and sees something terrifying. An elegant man, dressed in a suit, is sinking into the turbulent waters while suspicious vehicles disappear into the darkness. Without hesitation, she plunges into the icy waters and manages to drag the unconscious man to the shore. When he finally awakens, still disoriented and confused, he whispers words that make the girl collapse in tears. The rain hammered against the loose planks of the shack like desperate fingers drumming on a door. Marina pulled the torn blanket up to her chin, trying to ignore the cold that seeped through the cracks in the wooden wall. At 8 years old, she had already learned that complaining didn't warm anyone, and that life on the forgotten banks of the city's river was a constant battle between sleeping and surviving. The wind howled through the branches of nearby trees, creating a melancholic symphony she knew by heart. It had been another tough day in the city, asking for spare change, dodging pitying stares and whispered comments about just another lost kid. Marina had built an invisible armor around her heart, made of pride and fierce determination that protected her from the constant ache of having no one. She was almost drifting off when the screams cut through the night like sharp knives. Marina sat bolt upright, every muscle tense. Screams by the river were never good news. It could be someone drowning, or worse, the dangerous men who sometimes appeared there doing things an 8-year-old girl shouldn't see. She had learned early to hide when she heard strange voices in the dark, but these screams were different. There was genuine desperation there, a terror that made her stomach clench. Marina crawled to the makeshift window, an opening covered by old plastic sheeting, and cautiously peered outside. What she saw made her blood run cold. A man was struggling in the dark river water, his elegant clothes, a suit that looked expensive even when drenched, contrasting brutally with his desperate situation. He screamed for help as the current pulled him under, his hands slapping the water's surface in increasingly weaker movements. On the opposite bank, Marina saw shadows moving quickly. Hooded figures ran toward 2 dark cars, their voices low, charged with urgency and nervousness. One of them yelled something about problem solved before they slammed the doors shut and sped away, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. Marina's heart pounded so hard she could hear it over the rain. Those men had thrown the man in the suit into the river on purpose. It was an attempted murder, and now he was dying right before her eyes. For a terrible moment, Marina was paralyzed. It wasn't her problem. She didn't know this man, and getting involved could put her in danger. The voice of reason in her head, the one that had kept her alive on the streets for so long, screamed at her to hide and pretend she hadn't seen anything. But then, the man stopped struggling. Something inside Marina's chest broke when she saw the elegant body begin to sink into the turbulent waters. It was as if she were watching a part of herself disappear, the part that still believed someone, somewhere, cared enough about her to save her if she were drowning. Without allowing fear to paralyze her, Marina ran out of the shack, her old pajamas clinging to her thin skin. The rain hit her like icy whips, but she didn't even feel it. Her bare feet slipped on the muddy bank as she plunged into the dark water. The river was colder than she had imagined. The current tried to drag her too, but Marina had learned to swim in these dangerous waters since she was very young. It was one of the few skills life had gifted her. She swam desperately toward the spot where she had last seen the man sink. Her lungs burned, but she dove, fumbling in the darkness until her fingers touched wet fabric. With all the strength her small body possessed, Marina began to drag the unconscious man toward the bank, knowing that both their lives depended on her unwavering determination to never give up on anything. Marina dragged the heavy body through the muddy bank, her small arms trembling with exhaustion and cold. The man was completely unconscious, water dripping from his expensive clothes as she struggled to pull him away from the dangerous river's edge. Every step was a battle against her own body weight. but the determination that had always kept her alive pulsed through her veins like liquid fire. She managed to drag him to a safer area, under the protection of a large tree that offered some shelter from the relentless rain. Marina knelt beside him, her small hands trembling as she checked if he was still breathing. The man's chest rose and fell in irregular movements, and she felt such intense relief that she almost collapsed right there. She had saved a life. For the first time in her 8 years of existence, she had done something that truly mattered. Marina observed the man's face in the faint light coming from the shack. He looked to be in his 40s, with dark hair matted to his forehead and features that, Key even unconscious, conveyed a certain nobility. His clothes were definitely expensive, the kind of suit she saw on important men who drove through the city, looking through their windows as if people like her were invisible. But now this important man was completely vulnerable, depending on her to survive. Marina ran back to the shack and brought her blanket, the only one she owned. It didn't matter if she would be cold. That man needed it more than she did. She covered him carefully, trying to protect him from the continuing rain. Then she sat beside him, watching, waiting for some sign that he would wake up. That's when he began to stir. First, there were only low groans, then movement in his arms. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. Marina leaned over him, her heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. Would he be angry? Would he be scared of her? Or worse, would he call the police, thinking she had done something wrong? The man blinked several times, trying to focus his gaze. When he finally saw her, his expression changed completely. It was as if he were seeing a ghost, something impossible and wonderful at the same time. His eyes instantly filled with tears. "Anna," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Anna, my daughter." Marina froze. No one had ever spoken to her like that. With such desperate tenderness in their voice, she opened her mouth to correct him, to say she wasn't Anna, that she was just Marina, the orphaned girl who lived in the shack by the river. But then he extended a trembling hand and gently touched her rain-soaked face. "You look so much like my daughter," he murmured, still disoriented by the near-death experience. "Anna, daughter, I love you so much. I miss you so much." The words hit Marina like a lightning bolt. She had never heard those words before. No one had ever said, "Daughter, I love you," to her. No one had ever looked at her with such desperate love in their eyes, as if she were the most precious person in the entire world. Tears began to stream down her face, mixing with the rain. They weren't tears of sadness, but of something much deeper. A thirst being quenched for the first time. A fundamental need being met, even if by mistake, even if for only a few seconds. She tried to speak, but the words refused to come out. The man continued to look at her with those eyes full of paternal love, still confused by the near-death experience. To him, in that moment, she truly was his lost daughter. And for Marina, even knowing it was a mistake, those seconds were the most precious of her entire life. She finally found her voice. But all she could whisper was, "You're safe now." It was a promise she would make with all the strength of her small heart, even without fully understanding what it would mean for both of them. Marina realized she needed to get the man out of there before anyone showed up. The rain was letting up, and dawn would soon break. If those dangerous men returned looking for evidence, they would find both of them vulnerable on the riverbank. Her street smarts had taught her that predators always returned to finish the job. "Can you walk?" she asked softly, gently touching his shoulder. The man blinked again, confusion still clouding his eyes. Reality was slowly returning, but he still looked at her with that impossible expression of recognition, as if she really were the daughter he had lost. Where are we?" he murmured, trying to sit up. "Near the river." "But it's not safe to stay here," Marina said, helping him to his feet. "Those men, they threw you in the water. They might come back." The words seemed to awaken something in his memory. His eyes widened, and he looked around nervously. as if finally understanding the danger they had been in. "You saved me," he said, looking at Marina with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "A child saved me." Marina felt her cheeks flush. Compliments were rare in her life, and coming from someone who had called her daughter, they held a special weight. "Come," she said, taking his hand. "My home is nearby. You need to dry off and rest." She guided him across the uneven ground to her shack. When she opened the door and he saw the inside, the thin mattress on the floor, the table made of crates, the walls with cracks that let the wind in, Marina felt shame for the first time. She had always been proud of having found a place of her own to live, but seeing it through the eyes of a clearly wealthy man, she realized how precarious her home was. "Sorry, it's not much," she murmured, lowering her eyes. To her surprise, he gently squeezed her hand. "It's perfect," he said, and there was sincerity in his voice. "It's a home, and you're sharing it with me." Marina felt something warm spread through her chest. No one had ever called her shack a home before. Most people saw it as a symbol of poverty and abandonment, but he saw something different. She helped him sit on her only stool, then hurried to get some dry cloths she used as towels. While he tried to dry himself, Marina lit a candle, her only light source, and brewed some weak tea with the herbs she collected near the river. "What's your name?" the man asked, watching her move around the small home with the efficiency of someone who had learned to take care of herself very early. "Marina," she replied, handing him the warm mug. "And yours?" "Edward," he said, then hesitated. "Edward Sterling." Marina didn't recognize the name, but she sensed by the way he said it that he must be important. There was something in his posture, even wet and exhausted, that suggested power and influence. "Edward," she repeated, liking the sound. "Why did those men do that to you?" Edward's face darkened. He took a sip of the tea and remained silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with painful memories. "There are people who want to harm me," he finally said. "People who think they can take what's mine through violence and intimidation." Marina nodded. She understood about bad people who took advantage of the weak. She had met many on the streets. "But you're safe now," she said, repeating the promise she had made on the riverbank. "They won't find you here." Edward looked at her with that intense expression again, as if he were seeing something miraculous. "Why did you save me?" he asked. "You don't know me. You could have gotten hurt." Marina thought about the question. She couldn't fully explain it, but something inside her had refused to let that man die. "Because everyone deserves to be saved," she said simply. The answer seemed to touch him deeply. Edward closed his eyes and, for the first time since he had woken up, Marina saw real tears stream down his face. The first week passed like a strange dream for Marina. Edward had grown stronger each day, but something in him seemed broken beyond physical wounds. She watched him when he thought she wasn't looking, seeing the deep pain in his eyes whenever he thought he was alone. In the mornings, he helped Marina with small tasks around the shack, fixing what he could with the makeshift tools she possessed. In the afternoons, when she went out to forage for food in the city, he stayed hidden, always alert for any suspicious sound that might indicate the dangerous men had returned. But it was the nights Marina treasured most. Edward told stories about distant places he had visited, about tall buildings and impressive machines. In return, she shared her own stories, about how she had learned to fish in the river, about the different types of wild fruits that grew in the area, about the animals that visited her when she felt most alone. It was on one of those nights, while sharing a small meal by candlelight, that Edward finally opened his heart. "I had a daughter," he said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. "Anna. She'd be exactly your age now." Marina felt her stomach clench. She had been waiting for this conversation since the first night, when he had mistaken her for this mysterious daughter. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. Edward closed his eyes, as if the question caused physical pain. "My ex-business partner, Richard Miller, He orchestrated everything. He falsified documents, bribed judges, created false evidence against me during the divorce proceedings. He made it seem like I was a negligent, even dangerous father. His voice trembled with repressed anger. He managed to get my ex-wife full custody and then convinced them to move far away. I haven't seen my Anna in 3 years. Marina felt tears burning in her eyes. It wasn't just the sadness in Edward's voice that touched her, but the sudden realization that there were other children in the world who had been separated from parents who loved them. "Why did he do it?" she asked. "For the company," Edward sighed. "We built a construction company together that became very valuable. Richard wanted it all for himself, but I would never sell my share. So he decided to destroy me personally first, then take what was mine." Marina processed this information. She was beginning to understand why those men had tried to harm Edward by the river. It wasn't just about money. It was about a wicked man who had torn a family apart and now wanted to finish what he had started. "And now he sent those men because you didn't give up," Marina said. "Exactly," Edward nodded. "He thought that after losing Anna, I would finally give in, but I kept fighting to get my daughter and my company back, so he decided it was easier to simply eliminate me." Marina felt a rage growing in her chest, an indignation she had never experienced before. She had known many cruel adults in her life, but the idea of someone deliberately separating a family, causing so much pain to an innocent child, filled her with a protective fury. "You'll get your daughter back," she said, with a fierce determination that surprised even herself. "I won't let that evil man win." Edward looked at her in astonishment. In that moment, Marina seemed much older than her 8 years, as if the injustice of the situation had awakened a strength in her she didn't even know she possessed. "Marina," he said gently, "and you've already done more for me than anyone had a right to expect. I can't ask you to get more involved. It's dangerous." But Marina had already made up her mind. Edward wasn't just the man she had saved. He was the father she had always dreamed of having, and Anna was the sister she never knew she wanted. If Richard Miller thought he could destroy this family, he'd have to go through her first. "You're not asking," Marina said firmly. "I'm offering." In the second week, Marina started noticing strange things. First were the unfamiliar cars driving too slowly past the road near the river. Then, footprints in the mud that weren't hers or Edward's. Someone was investigating the area, looking for something or someone. Marina had developed sharp instincts during her years alone on the streets. She knew how to recognize when she was being watched, when something wasn't right in her surroundings. And now all those instincts were screaming that danger was approaching. "Edward," she said one morning, as they made weak coffee with the last of their provisions, "I think they're looking for you." Edward stopped stirring the sugar in his mug and looked at her with full attention. "What did you see?" Marina told him about the cars, the footprints, the constant feeling of being watched. Edward listened in silence, his face growing darker with each detail. "Richard doesn't give up easily," he murmured. "If he suspects I survived, he'll send more people. Worse people than the first time." Fear chilled Marina's stomach, but not for herself. The idea of something happening to Edward, of losing him after finally finding someone who made her feel like part of a family, was unbearable. "We have to get out of here," she said. "No," Edward shook his head. "I can't drag you into this. You've already risked too much for me." Marina felt a burst of frustration. Why did adults always think they knew what was best for her? Why didn't Edward understand that she wasn't being dragged? She was choosing to stay by his side. "You're not dragging me into anything," she said firmly. "I choose to stay. She hesitated, searching for the right words. "You're the family I always wanted. I won't abandon you now." The words came out more directly than she had intended, exposing a vulnerability she usually kept hidden. But it was the truth. Edward had filled a void in her life that she didn't even know existed. Edward looked at her for a long moment, his eyes shining with emotion. "Marina," he said softly, You've become family to me too. That's why I need to protect you. Then protect me by staying with me, Marina retorted. We're both stronger together. I know places to hide that they'll never find. Before Edward could answer, both heard the sound of approaching cars. It wasn't normal road traffic. It was several vehicles moving slowly, deliberately. Marina ran to the window and cautiously peered out. 3 dark cars had stopped on the road, and men dressed in black were getting out. They carried flashlights and seemed to be organizing to search the area systematically. They're here, Marina whispered, her heart pounding. Edward moved quickly, grabbing the few valuables they had. But Marina was already 1 step ahead, running to the corner of the shack where she had built a hiding spot years ago, a disguised crawl space under the floorboards that she used to store her most precious treasures. Here, she said, lifting the boards. It's tight, but we both fit. Edward looked at the hiding spot and then at Marina, clearly impressed with her preparation. You've thought of everything, haven't you? When you live alone, you always have to have a plan, Marina replied, helping him into the hiding spot. They squeezed into the small, dark space, Marina carefully replacing the boards over their heads. Through the cracks in the wood, they could hear the men's voices approaching, their flashlights sweeping the ground around the shack. Marina felt Edward's hand find hers in the dark, squeezing gently. It was a gesture of both protection and gratitude, and she squeezed back, silently promising that she wouldn't let anything happen to him. Outside, the voices grew louder. The men were now very close to the shack, and Marina could hear their heavy boots pacing around the fragile structure. In the cramped hiding spot, Marina and Edward barely dared to breathe. The sound of heavy boots echoed above their heads as the men ransacked the shack. Marina felt Edward's heart pounding against her arm, or perhaps it was her own heart, racing with fear. "No one's here," a gruff voice said above them. "Just a pile of junk." "Keep looking," replied another voice, this one with an accent Marina couldn't identify. "The boss said there's a kid living around here. If she saw anything that night." Marina felt Edward tense beside her. They weren't just looking for him, they knew about her too. Somehow, Richard had discovered that a girl lived near the river and might have witnessed the attempted murder. "What kind of kid would live in this godforsaken place?" grumbled the first man. "The kind no one will miss if she disappears," the second replied coldly. The words sent a chill down Marina's spine that had nothing to do with the cold of the hiding spot. These men weren't just dangerous to Edward. Now she was in their sights too. The footsteps continued for a few more agonizing minutes. Marina heard drawers being opened, objects being thrown to the floor, her few possessions being destroyed. It was as if they were violating not just her home, but her entire existence. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the voices began to move away. "Nothing here. Let's check the other shacks downstream. What if we don't find anything? Then we'll put up flyers all over town." A high reward always makes someone talk. The sound of boots faded, followed by the rumble of cars starting and driving off. Marina and Edward waited 10 more minutes in total silence before daring to emerge from the hiding spot. When they finally emerged, Marina almost cried at the state of her home. Everything was ransacked, broken, scattered across the floor. The few books she had managed to acquire over the years had torn pages. Her clothes were thrown in the mud that had come in through the loose planks. "Marina, I'm so sorry," Edward said, looking at the destruction in horror. "This is my fault." But Marina wasn't focused on the destroyed objects. She was thinking about what she had heard the men say. "They're going to put up flyers," she said, "with our pictures. They'll offer money for someone to turn us in." Edward nodded somberly. "Richard has infinite resources, and he doesn't care about bribing innocent people to get what he wants." Marina felt a familiar determination growing in her chest. It was the same strength that had led her to jump into the river to save Edward that first night. "Then we have to leave the city," she said. "We have to find a place where he can't reach us." "Marina, no," Edward began, but she interrupted him. "Listen, Edward, it's not just about you anymore. They know about me too. If I stay here alone, they'll get me anyway. Our only chance is to stick together." Edward looked at her for a long moment, seeing the fierce determination in her young eyes. Marina was no longer just the child who had saved him. She was becoming his partner in this fight against injustice. "You're right," he finally said. "But where can we go? Richard has connections all over the region." Marina smiled for the first time since the men had appeared. She had grown up on the streets. She knew people and places that rich men like Richard couldn't even imagine existed. "I know places," she said. "People who help kids like me. Places where men in suits would never set foot." As they gathered what was still salvageable of their belongings, Marina couldn't stop thinking about Anna, Edward's lost daughter. If Richard was capable of terrorizing a child who had simply witnessed his crimes, what else was he capable of? The fight was no longer just to protect Edward. It was to reunite a family that had been cruelly torn apart. Marina and Edward were preparing to leave the destroyed shack when she found something that chilled her to the bone. Among the papers scattered by Richard's men, there was a photograph she had never seen before. A picture of a smiling blonde girl with eyes exactly the same color as Edward's. "Is this Anna?" Marina asked, holding the photo with trembling hands. Edward looked at it, and his eyes immediately filled with tears. "Yes," he whispered. "It's my daughter. But how? Why do they have a picture of her?" Marina turned the photograph over and saw something written on the back in handwriting she didn't recognize. "St. Clair's Children's Home, Anna Sterling, 8 years old." Her mind slowly processed the information, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Edward," she said, her voice trembling, "your daughter is in a children's home. She's not with your ex-wife." Edward snatched the photo from Marina's hands, reading and rereading the words on the back as if he could make them say something different. "This isn't possible," he murmured. "Richard told me she was fine, that she had just moved far away with her mother." "A lie," Marina said, feeling a rage building in her chest. "He lied about everything." Edward collapsed onto the broken stool, the photo trembling in his hands. Marina could see his mind working, processing the terrible implications of what they had discovered. "If Anna is at the children's home, where is my ex-wife?" he asked, more to himself than to Marina. Marina didn't answer, but both were thinking the same terrible thing. If Richard was capable of attempting to murder Edward, what else was he capable of to keep his secrets? "We have to go get her," Marina said with determination. "We have to get Anna out of there." "Marina, we can't just show up at a children's home," Edward said, trying to be rational despite his despair. "They'll call the police. And if Richard has connections there too, then what are we going to do?" Marina exploded. "Leave her there while this evil man controls her life as he did yours." Edward looked at Marina and saw something in her that surprised him. It wasn't just anger or indignation, it was the protective love of an older sister for a younger sister she had never known. Marina already considered Anna part of their family. "You're right," Edward said, standing up with renewed determination. "But we have to be smart. If Richard found out I survived, he might be watching Anna too." Marina nodded, her mind already working on possibilities. She knew the children's home system better than Edward could imagine. She had been through several before managing to escape and live alone. "I can get in there," she said. "As a kid looking for shelter, I can find out how Anna is, if she's okay, if there are guards or strange people watching the place." "It's too dangerous," Edward protested. "Less dangerous than leaving her in Richard's hands," Marina retorted. "Edward, Anna is your daughter. But now she's my sister too. I won't let anything happen to her." Edward looked at the brave girl in front of him and felt his heart break and fill at the same time. Marina was willing to risk everything for a child she had never met, simply because that child was part of the family they were building together. "All right," he finally said, "but we do this together. And if something goes wrong, if there's the slightest sign of danger, we get out of there immediately." Marina smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen since Richard's men appeared. Together, she agreed. As they planned how to get to St. Clair's children's home, both felt they were crossing a line from which there would be no turning back. They were no longer just a man and a child hiding from criminals. They were a family fighting to reunite, and nothing would stop them from bringing Anna home. St. Clair's children's home was located in the oldest part of the city, a red brick building that had seen better days. Marina observed the place for an entire hour, hidden behind a large tree, studying the movement patterns of people entering and leaving. Edward was waiting a few blocks away, ready to act if something went wrong. Marina had dressed in her most worn clothes and had rubbed some mud on her face to look even more destitute. It wasn't difficult. She really was an orphaned child looking for shelter. The only difference was that now she had a family waiting for her outside. Taking a deep breath, Marina approached the main entrance. A middle-aged woman with thick glasses was sitting behind a counter, filling out papers. She looked up when Marina entered, and her expression immediately softened. "Oh dear," the woman said. "Are you all right? Where are your parents?" Marina allowed her true emotions to show, the loneliness, the fear, the vulnerability she normally hid behind her protective toughness. "I don't have parents," she said in a small voice. "I'm hungry and have nowhere to sleep." The woman immediately got up and came around the counter to kneel beside Marina. "My name is Sister Betty," she said gently. "You're safe now. We'll take care of you." Marina felt a pang of guilt for lying to someone so kind, but she remembered Anna and strengthened her resolve. "Can I meet the other children?" Marina asked. "To see if I'll feel at home here." Sister Betty smiled warmly. "Of course, dear. We'll give you a tour of the facilities." As they walked through the corridors, Marina observed everything carefully. The children's home seemed well maintained, and the children she saw appeared healthy and relatively happy. This reassured her a little. At least Anna wasn't suffering abuse or neglect. "How many children do you have here?" Marina asked as they passed a recreation room. "About 40, replied Sister Betty. "We have children of all ages, from infants to teenagers." Marina nodded, discreetly looking for any sign of Anna. It was when they reached the cafeteria that she saw her. Sitting alone at a table in the corner was a blonde girl with exactly Edward's eyes. She was distractedly stirring her food, with a sad expression that broke Marina's heart. This was Anna, Edward's lost daughter, the sister Marina never knew she wanted to have. "Who's that girl over there?" Marina asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Sister Betty followed her gaze, and her expression became melancholic. "Ah, that's Anna. Poor dear, she arrived here 3 years ago. Very traumatized. She used to say her father would come for her. At first, she'd stand by the window every day, waiting. She still does sometimes." Marina felt tears stinging her eyes. Anna had been waiting for Edward for 3 years, and he didn't even know where she was. "Why hasn't she been adopted?" Marina asked. "Well," Sister Betty lowered her voice, "there are complicated legal documents. A man came here last year saying he was responsible for her, but he couldn't finalize the adoption. He said there were legal issues to resolve first." Marina's stomach clenched. She was sure this man was Richard, keeping Anna as a pawn in his cruel game against Edward. At that moment, Anna looked up and met Marina's gaze. For a second, the two girls stared at each other across the cafeteria. Anna tilted her head slightly, as if trying to remember where she had seen Marina before. Marina knew she couldn't approach her now, not with Sister Betty nearby, but she managed to make a small gesture with her hand, almost imperceptible, that said, "It's okay, I'm here." To her surprise and relief, Anna smiled slightly and waved back. Marina spent the rest of the afternoon at the children's home, participating in activities with the other children while waiting for an opportunity to speak to Anna alone. Sister Betty had said she could stay for dinner and decide if she wanted to spend the night, which would give Marina time to execute her plan. During drawing class, Marina managed to sit near Anna. The two worked in silence for a few minutes, each pretending to concentrate on their papers while discreetly observing the other. It was Anna who broke the silence first. "You're not like the other kids who come here," she whispered without looking up from her drawing. Marina felt her heart race. Anna was more perceptive than she had expected. "Why do you say that?" she asked softly. "The other kids arrive crying or angry or very scared," Anna explained, still drawing. "You arrived as if you were looking for something specific." Marina looked at Anna's drawing, and her heart almost stopped. It was a drawing of a tall man in a suit, holding the hand of a small girl. At the top of the paper, in careful letters, was written, "Me and Daddy." "Is that your dad?" Marina asked softly. Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded bravely. "He's going to come get me," she said with a determination that greatly resembled Edward. "I know he will. He promised me he would never abandon me." Marina felt a wave of emotion so intense that she had to fight not to cry right there. Edward was right. Anna had kept hope alive for 3 years, trusting her father's love, even when everyone around her had given up. "Anna," Marina whispered, looking around to make sure no one was listening, "what if I told you your dad is looking for you, that he never stopped looking?" Anna dropped her pencil and looked directly at Marina for the first time. Her green eyes, so similar to Edward's, shining with desperate hope. "You know him?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marina nodded slowly. "He's right nearby. He asked me to find you and make sure you're okay." Tears began to stream down Anna's face, but they were tears of relief and happiness. "I knew it," she whispered. "I always knew he'd come." Marina took Anna's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. "Anna, I need to tell you some important things. There are bad people who tried to hurt your father and who want to stop you two from being together. That's why he couldn't find you before." Anna's face darkened. "The evil man who came here last year." Marina straightened, alert. "What man?" "A man in a very expensive suit came here and talked to the director. He said he was my uncle and that he was going to take care of me, but I knew he was lying," Anna explained, her voice growing firmer. "Daddy taught me to recognize liars. That man had lying eyes." Marina felt proud of Anna's intelligence. The girl had instinctively rejected Richard's manipulation. What happened next? "I told everyone he wasn't my uncle, that my daddy was coming for me, and that I didn't want to go with that strange man. He got very angry, but he couldn't force me because I wouldn't stop screaming." Anna smiled slightly. "Sister Betty said I was very stubborn, but that I was right to trust my instincts." Marina felt deep admiration for Anna. At 8 years old, she had resisted Richard with the same courage Edward showed. "Anna, your dad really wants to see you, but we have to be careful. That evil man is still trying to hurt both of you." Anna nodded seriously. "I understand. What do we need to do?" Marina smiled. Anna wasn't just Edward's daughter, she was definitely her sister in courage and determination. "First, I'm going to leave here and tell your dad that you're okay and that you never stopped believing in him. Then, we'll make a plan to get you out of here safely." Anna squeezed Marina's hand tighter. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing my daddy back to me." Marina left the children's home with a broken heart and full of hope at the same time. She managed to say goodbye to Anna with a quick hug, whispering that she would return soon with her father. The look of happiness in the girl's eyes was something Marina would carry forever. Edward was anxiously waiting at the agreed meeting point, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. When he saw Marina approaching, he ran to her immediately. "How is she?" he asked before Marina could even speak. "Is she okay? Is she hurt? Are they treating her well?" "Edward, breathe," Marina said, holding his hands. "Anna is fine. Physically, she's healthy, and the people at the children's home are kind to her." Edward let out a sigh of relief, but Marina saw that he was still tense. "But," he asked, realizing there was more. "But her heart is broken," Marina said gently. She's been by the window every day for 3 years, waiting for you to show up. She never stopped believing you'd come for her." Tears began to stream down Edward's face. The idea of his little daughter waiting for him day after day, while he didn't even know where she was torture. "And there's more," Marina continued. "Richard was there. He tried to take Anna last year, pretending to be her uncle. But she's smart. She completely rejected him and refused to go." Edward's expression changed from sadness to unadulterated rage. "He tried to take my daughter. Anna said he had lying eyes, and that you had taught her to recognize liars." Marina smiled slightly. She screamed so much that he couldn't force her. Edward felt pride mixed with a murderous rage. His daughter had protected herself from Richard, but the fact that she had needed to do so infuriated him. "And do we have to get her out of there today?" Edward said. "We can't just show up and take her," Marina said, forcing herself to be the voice of reason. "They'll call the police, and if Richard has contacts in the system, then what do you suggest?" Edward asked, his frustration evident. Marina had thought about this the whole way back. "We have to do this legally. You need to prove who you are and that you have the right to Anna's custody. But all the documents, all the evidence proving my paternity are at the company or at home, places Richard is controlling," Edward said desperately. "Then we have to get those documents," Marina said with determination. "Where exactly are they?" Edward thought for a moment. "There's a copy of Anna's birth certificate in my office, in the safe, and divorce papers proving I had visitation rights." "And where is this office?" "On the 20th floor of the Metropolitan Plaza." "But Marina, it's impossible. The building has security, cameras everywhere, and Richard surely changed the access codes." Marina interrupted with a smile that Edward was beginning to recognize as a sign that she had concocted an audacious plan. "Edward, you forget who you're talking to. I spent years sneaking into places I shouldn't be to get food and shelter. A corporate building is a piece of cake." "It's too dangerous," Edward protested. "If they catch you, if we do nothing, Anna will continue waiting at that children's home window," Marina retorted. "And Richard will try to take her again, and next time he might succeed." Edward looked at the brave girl in front of him and realized she was right. They had no choice. They had to act. "All right," he finally said. "But we do this together. I know the building. You know how to infiltrate. We're a team." Marina smiled and extended her hand. "Team family," she said. Edward squeezed her hand, feeling for the first time in weeks that maybe, just maybe, they could reunite his shattered family. The Metropolitan Plaza rose against the night sky like a tower of glass and steel. Marina and Edward observed the security movements for 2 hours, studying the guards' patterns and identifying the cameras. It was Wednesday night, and traffic was reduced, but there were still significant challenges. "The night shift only has 2 guards," Edward observed. "One stays at the reception desk, the other does rounds every 30 minutes. Marina nodded, her experienced eyes having already identified the security system's weak points. "There's a service entrance in the back they use for cleaning. If we can get in there during the patrol, we'll have at least 25 minutes before the next guard passes." "Marina, maybe we should wait," Edward began. But she interrupted him. "Edward, every day we wait, Anna remains alone in that children's home, and Richard has more time to plan something worse. We have to do this now." The determination in her voice reminded Edward why he had survived that terrible night in the river. Marina wasn't just courageous, she had the ability to act when action was needed. At 11 o'clock that night, they moved. Marina had found cleaning uniforms in a nearby dumpster, and both dressed to look like employees of a third-party cleaning crew. Edward was impressed by how easily Marina took on the role, carrying cleaning supplies as if it were part of her routine. Entry through the back was easier than Edward had expected. Marina was right. Her street smarts had taught her to read situations and find opportunities that normal people wouldn't even notice. The service elevator took them to the 20th floor without incident. When the doors opened, Edward felt a wave of conflicting emotions. This had been his office for 15 years, the place where he had built his business empire, but also where he had received the devastating news that Anna had disappeared. "This way," he whispered, guiding Marina through the familiar corridors. Edward's office was exactly as he remembered it, except for one thing. There were documents scattered on his desk, as if someone had been there recently. "Richard has been here," Edward said, his stomach clenching. Marina examined the papers. They were contracts, financial documents, and something that chilled her to the bone. "Edward," she said, her voice tense, "look at this." It was a legal document with the letterhead of St. Clair's Children's Home. The title read, "Custody Transfer Request," and it was signed by Richard Miller as temporary legal guardian of Anna Sterling. "He's trying to officially adopt her," Edward said, the terrible reality sinking in. "If he gets those papers approved, Anna will legally be his daughter," Marina completed, "and you'll never be able to get her back." The urgency of the situation hit them both like a punch. It was no longer just about reuniting a family. It was a race against time to stop Richard from stealing Anna permanently. Edward rushed to the safe behind his desk. His hands trembled as he typed the combination, praying that Richard hadn't discovered and changed it. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were all the documents they needed. Anna's original birth certificate, the divorce papers proving his paternal rights, and evidence of Richard's bribes and manipulations during the process. "Marina, we got it," Edward said, grabbing a folder full of documents. "This proves everything, that I'm Anna's father, that Richard manipulated the process, that—" A sound of footsteps in the corridor made them both freeze. "The guard's coming back early," Marina whispered. Edward was almost finished photographing the documents with a borrowed phone when they heard someone speaking loudly in the hallway. And it wasn't the voice of a security guard. It was Richard Miller's voice. "I want you to comb every inch of this floor. If Edward is alive, he'll try to get these documents back, and when he shows up, you know what to do." Marina and Edward exchanged a panicked glance. Richard wasn't just watching the building. He had set a trap. Marina acted on instinct. She grabbed Edward's hand and pulled him toward the office window. 20 stories above the ground. It seemed like an impossible option. But she had noticed something Edward hadn't. A maintenance platform just 10 feet below. "Trust me," Marina whispered. Edward looked into the determined eyes of the girl who had saved his life and nodded without hesitation. Marina opened the window silently and pointed to the platform. "I'll go first. Then you pass me the documents." Before Edward could protest, Marina was already hanging from the window ledge. With the agility she had developed years surviving on the streets, she lowered herself and landed on the platform with an almost imperceptible sound. Edward carefully passed the folder with the documents, then followed Marina. His muscles protested. He wasn't young anymore and definitely wasn't an acrobat. But the thought of Anna waiting for him gave him strength. They were crouched on the platform when they heard Richard and his men entering the office. "Did you search everything?" Richard's voice echoed through the open window. "Yes, sir. No one's here." "The safe was opened," Richard said, his voice laced with fury. "Edward was here. Find him." Marina and Edward remained motionless on the platform, barely daring to breathe. They knew any movement could be heard from above. That's when the unthinkable happened. Edward's phone, which they had used to photograph the documents, started ringing. The sound echoed through the silent night like a fire alarm. "Down there!" a voice from the office shouted. "On the platform!" Marina didn't lose a second. She grabbed Edward's hand and ran to the edge of the platform, where an emergency ladder descended down the side of the building. "Marina, this is crazy!" Edward protested. "Crazier would be letting Richard catch us," she retorted, already starting to climb down. Behind them, they could hear men preparing to descend through the window. Marina and Edward descended the ladder as fast as possible, Edward fighting his vertigo, while Marina moved with the confidence of someone who had climbed dozens of abandoned buildings before. When they reached the 10th floor, Marina stopped abruptly. "Edward," she said, looking down, "they have men on the ground floor too. They're surrounding the building." Edward looked and saw that she was right. Black cars were positioned at all exits of the building. "We're trapped," he murmured. Marina looked around, her mind working quickly. That's when she saw it. The building next door had a covered walkway connecting the two buildings on the 12th floor. "We're not trapped," she said with determination. "We have to go up." "Up? Marina? They're coming from above." "Exactly. They won't expect us to go up. We'll use the covered walkway to the other building, then go down from there." Edward looked at Marina with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. At 8 years old, she was outmaneuvering adult strategists in tactical thinking. They climbed 2 floors, hearing the shouts and footsteps of their pursuers echoing from various levels at the same time. When they reached the covered walkway, Marina was already calculating distances and angles like a pro. The walkway was about 15 feet long, with glass windows on both sides. It was risky. They would be visible for a few seconds, but it was their only chance. "Now!" Marina whispered. They ran across the walkway, Edward clutching the folder of documents to his chest. For a terrible moment, Edward thought they had made it. Then they heard the sound of glass shattering behind them. Richard Miller had broken the window of the other building and was shouting orders to his men. He had seen Edward and Marina crossing the walkway. "Edward!" Richard yelled. "You can't hide forever! And when I get that child you're using, she'll find out what happens to those who interfere with my business." The threat against Marina made something snap inside Edward. All the anger, all the pain of the last 3 years, all the injustice Richard had caused transformed into iron determination. Edward stopped running and turned to face his enemy. Edward was no longer going to run. With the documents in one hand and Marina safely behind him, he confronted Richard in the covered walkway. The city lights shone through the broken windows, creating a dramatic stage for the final confrontation. "Richard!" Edward shouted. "It's over! I have all the evidence of your crimes, all the proof of how you manipulated the system to steal my daughter." Richard emerged from the adjacent building, flanked by 2 large men. His expression was one of pure fury, but Edward noticed something else in his eyes: desperation. A desperate man was more dangerous, but also more prone to making mistakes. "Edward, you've always been naive," Richard Miller said with a cruel smirk. "You think some old papers are going to change anything? I control judges, police, social workers. Anna is already my daughter in the documents that matter, but she'll never truly be yours." Edward Sterling retorted, "Because you don't know how to love. You only know how to destroy." Marina stepped forward, surprising both men. "And because Anna already rejected you once," she said with courage. "She's too smart to fall for your lies." Richard's face contorted with rage. "You meddling little orphan! You shouldn't have survived that night in the river." The confession slipped out before he could control himself. Edward felt a murderous fury grow in his chest. Richard had just admitted to ordering his death, but it was Marina who acted first. During her weeks caring for Edward, she had secretly recorded their conversations about Richard's crimes, and now, hidden in her pocket, was a small voice recorder she had turned on the moment they entered the building. "Thank you very much for the confession," Marina said, pulling the recorder from her pocket and showing that it was recording. Richard's eyes widened in shock and panic. "You," he stammered, "but that won't." "Yes, it will," a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see Sister Betty emerging from the emergency stairs, accompanied by 2 police officers and Anna. "Marina called us before you entered the building," Sister Betty explained, "and she told us where you'd be and that you might need help." Edward looked at Marina with complete admiration. She had planned everything: the recording, the call to the authorities, even the escape route that brought them to where the police could find them. Anna broke the silence, running toward Edward. "Daddy!" she cried, throwing herself into his arms. Edward fell to his knees, embracing his daughter for the first time in 3 years. Tears streamed down both their faces as he held her as if he would never let her go. "Anna, my daughter, I'm so sorry," Edward sobbed. "I looked for you every day. I never stopped loving you. I knew you'd come." Anna cried against his shoulder. "I always knew." Marina watched the reunion with tears of happiness streaming down her face. Seeing Edward and Anna together again was the most beautiful thing she had ever witnessed. Richard tried to slip away quietly, but the police officers were already moving to arrest him. Marina's recording, combined with the documents Edward had retrieved, provided enough evidence to convict him of kidnapping, legal manipulation, attempted murder, and a dozen other crimes. "Marina," Anna said, turning in her father's arms to look at the girl who had made it all possible. "Thank you for bringing my daddy back." Edward extended an arm to Marina, pulling her into the family embrace. "Marina didn't just bring your father back," Edward said, looking at the brave girl who had saved his life in every possible way. "She brought us a complete family." Anna looked at Marina with curiosity and hope. "Does that mean you're going to be my sister?" Marina looked at Edward, who nodded with a warm smile. "If you'll have me," Marina said timidly. "Forever," Anna replied, pulling Marina into a tight hug. 6 weeks had passed since that rainy night that changed 3 lives forever. The house Edward had bought was in a quiet neighborhood with a spacious garden where Anna and Marina spent hours playing and talking. It was a house filled with laughter, a house where love never ran short. Marina woke up on a sunny Saturday morning, still getting used to the feeling of having a soft bed, a room of her own, and the certainty that breakfast would be waiting for her in the kitchen. More importantly, she woke up every day knowing that she wasn't alone in the world. She went downstairs and found Edward in the kitchen, making pancakes. He had discovered that both Marina and Anna loved pancakes, and making the girls' breakfast had become his favorite weekend ritual. "Good morning, daughter," Edward said with a warm smile, and Marina felt her heart warm as it always did when he called her that. "Good morning, Daddy," Marina replied, still marveling at how natural it felt to use that word now. Anna came running from the living room, holding a new drawing. "Marina, look what I drew for you." Anna proudly showed the paper. It was a drawing of their family, Edward in the middle, with Anna on one side and Marina on the other, all holding hands in front of their new house. Above them, Anna had written in careful letters, "My family forever." "It's beautiful," Marina said, hugging her sister, "so I'll keep it forever." During breakfast, Edward shared the news he had received from his lawyer. Richard had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for all his crimes. The company was running smoothly under new management, and Edward had decided to use part of the profits to create a foundation that helped orphaned children find families. "The first child our foundation will help," Edward said, looking at Marina, "will receive a scholarship in your honor. The Marina Sterling Scholarship Fund for courageous children who never give up fighting for justice." Marina felt tears of pride stinging her eyes. She had gone from an orphaned girl living in a shack to a beloved daughter whose name would be on a scholarship fund that would help other children. "And I thought," Edward continued, "that maybe you two would like to help me choose these children. You two know better than anyone what it's like to need a family." Anna clapped excitedly. "We can help other girls like us find daddies and mommies, and we can teach them to be strong like you taught me," Anna said to Marina. After breakfast, the 3 went to the river where it had all begun. Edward had transformed the spot into a small environmental preserve, with benches and a plaque that read, "In memory of all who find hope when life seems lost." They sat on the bank where Marina had saved Edward that terrible night. Now, with the sun shining on the water and birds singing in the trees, the place felt completely different. "You know," Edward said, looking at the calm water, "I used to be afraid of this river. But now I realize it wasn't where I almost died. It was where my new life began. It was where we met," Anna added, holding her father's and sister's hands. Marina looked at the two people who had become her family and felt a gratitude so profound she could barely breathe. She had spent 8 years believing she was destined to be alone forever. But sometimes, when you least expect it, when your life seems most lost, love appears in ways you could never imagine. I love you all," Marina said simply. "We love you too," Edward and Anna replied simultaneously, pulling her into a family hug. As they watched the river flow peacefully toward the future, the three knew they had found something more valuable than all the money in the world. A true family, built not just on blood, but on love, courage, and the determination to never give up on each other. And somewhere, other orphaned children would benefit from the foundation this special family had created, spreading hope like ripples in a calm lake. The girl who once saved a drowning man had saved far more than a life. She had saved an entire family, including herself.